UFC BJJ 1 is in the books, and I have to say that I, Ross, host of the Jiu Jitsu Oracle, enjoyed the show for the most part, but I think there are a few things that can be done with UFC BJJ to make it better. So that's what I'm going to talk about in this edition of the Jiu Jitsu Oracle. Please jump into the comments on YouTube and let me know what you think. Did you enjoy the show? Did you not enjoy the show? And are there things, before you even hear me speak about them, that you think could be done to improve the event? So let's start with the main event. It pitted coaches Mikey Musumeci and Harrison Gabriel against each other, the coaches of the Road to the Title reality TV show that led into the event. Decisive victory for Mikey, ultimately securing a submission. For the whole match, he attacked Harrison's legs, and I think Harrison did a pretty good job standing up to Mikey's attacks up until the point that he didn't. So we now have Mikey as the first UFC BJJ bantamweight champion. And I think we're now in an interesting situation here because Mikey's competing at minus 135 pounds, okay? And that means his potential opponents, the amount of potential opponents out there are limited. I think what we need with Mikey is an opponent who can not just stand up to his leg locks, but who can offer counter leg locks and the threat of back takes in transition. And those kind of grapplers are few and far between. I think most of those grapplers are competing at a slightly heavier weight than Mikey. So I had a quick glance at the Flow Grappling rankings after the event, and at 135 pounds, kind of standout names on the list that I think might be a good matchup for Mikey are Junior Casio and Zach Kaina, right? If you know of any more, please let me know in the comments. But I think we're looking at a pretty limited list. If we were to move up to featherweight, 145 pounds, according to Flow's rankings, you're then bringing in names like Baby Shark, Diego Pato, Josh Cisneros, Fabricio Andre, Cole Abate, Kennedy Maciel, Owen Jones. So some big names and some guys who are seriously skilled and guys who can counter leg lock and who can take the back, and maybe even guys that can pass Mikey's guard. So it's a tricky situation for the UFC BJJ because they've kind of made Mikey the poster boy for their event, but they're very limited in opponents that they can get to face him. So you let me know what you think they should do opponent-wise from Mikey. As far as I know, coming out of the event, there was no opponent lined up to face him. We saw later on UFC had done some work in lining up another match for one of the other champions. I'll get onto that later, but I think Mikey's pretty limited in the amount of guys he can face. Also, on that match, something I want to address is the way Mikey was pulling guard. So we know with Mikey, he has a polarizing style. He wants to sit down and he wants to go after the legs. And in order to get to the ground, he was hopping on one leg, offering his leg to Harrison to make contact, and then he was going to ground. So he was playing the game. We kind of saw a similar strategy from Gordon Ryan in his last ADCC match with Nicky Rod, where he offered up this single leg for Nicky. Nicky grabbed it. Gordon got to ground in a period where no points were scored. So he was happy. He was on the ground. He hadn't conceded points. Nicky Rod was on top. So Mikey's kind of looking for a similar strategy. The thing is, the way Mikey was hopping around on one foot, I thought basically looked pretty stupid. And aesthetics matter. And one thing I want to say about it is, like, it's not even about attracting casual fans. It's about not putting off sort of more diehard or fans with like a deeper love for jiu-jitsu already. And when I'm sitting at home looking at that and going, what is Mikey doing? That looks ridiculous. That is not a good sign. Now, I would ban it outright if I was in charge of that promotion, just for looking ridiculous. I might say to the public, oh, this move's not allowed because it's kind of gaming the system, or the way I might put it across is, in order to pull guard, there has to be a period of meaningful contact before the athlete goes to ground. But I just think hopping around on one foot like a sort of kung fu fighter is not what is needed in BJJ. But you let me know. Some people have said it's a smart strategy to get to the ground, and I can see the smartness in the strategy. I'm arguing that not only can it be a smart strategy, but two things can be true at the same time. It can look absolutely ridiculous. And there are sports out there that ban things because they're ridiculous. You know, the amount of things that NFL have banned, maybe not always just in play, but outside of play with celebrations and things like that, just because they don't like it. They don't want it in the sport. So I think the UFC BJJ would be well minded to have a look at that situation. And sure, Mikey can get to guard bottom. It's a valid strategy, but he has to do it in a more aesthetically pleasing way. The thing with Mikey as well is, like, I'm a little bit disappointed that he doesn't threaten to take the back more when he's entering the legs, because that adds a new dimension. And when he did come to top, he was only coming to top to then sit back on the legs. Now, you might say, well, that's the scoring system at play there. The UFC encourages hunting for submission entanglements because that's the way you score points with the judges. That's what the judges are really favouring. And so there's less value to pass guard than there is to sit back on the leg. And if that's the case, and it's possibly having a negative effect on the action, then that's something that has to be looked at. That said, I think in general, like, the format of the show works. The arena, the octable works. The scoring system, the way the rounds are, I don't have any problems with that. I don't think it's like necessarily the only way to run events, and there are pluses and minuses to all scoring systems and the way you divide the time and the criteria you give to judges. But I think in general, I enjoyed the show from that point of view. So let me know what you think should happen with Mikey next. Who should he face? And can we do anything that would help make his matches more exciting? You could say, well, Mikey is there to win and he's just going about the job in the best way possible. And I get that. Sport is about winning. But if you don't do it in an entertaining way, if sport isn't entertaining, and there are lots of ways for sport to be entertaining, it doesn't just have to be all action. I spent a good period of 5 days across kind of the end of last week, heading into this week, watching England against India in cricket. And I found it entertaining as a spectacle across the 5 days. A friend I went for coffee with was dipping in and out of Le Mans 24-hour very recently. These things are not for everyone, but people who like them find them entertaining. And I would say my only issue is there were a couple of things in this event that, even although I really, really like grappling, I didn't find so entertaining, or were putting me off a little bit. That said, I did find other things really positive. So one of those positives, Andrew Tackett, he won the welterweight championship. By the way, the belts, if we're talking about not aesthetically pleasing things, I think the belts could be improved. Could not just have nice gold belts. Anyway, if you've seen them, you might know what I'm talking about. If you really like the belts, let me know in the comments. But Andrew Tackett is now holding the welterweight title. Convincing win over Andy Varela. In my preview, I said I was expecting Andrew to win, and coming out of it, I think the UFC should focus a lot of attention on Andrew. Kind of use Andrew and his brother William as like the first stars of the promotion. I know they're behind Mikey, but I think there's more value in Andrew. So he's now going to face Renato Canuto. I think that's a really good match. Renato Canuto, world champion. I think gi and no gi. Those titles came, a few years ago now. I think one was 2017, maybe one was 2021. So you could maybe say Hanao isn't absolutely at the peak of his powers, but he is a really, really good grappler. And that is a legitimate main event match. Andrew Tackett against Hanato Kanuto. So looking forward to seeing that when the UFC put it together. But yeah, really impressed with Andrew. And not only, but he has that style of grappling, looking for the takedown, looking for control, hunting the back, hunting the finish. I think that's the style of grappling that's really easy on the eye. And yeah, full credit to him for his performance. And then if he faces Hanato next, I think that's a great match. Love to see William, his brother, in the mix. So hopefully the UFC can get them both on the next card. The only thing is, when we're talking about potential opponents for these guys, like, okay, Andrew has Hanato Kanuto soon. Great. What comes after that for the winner? Mikey Musumeci, who does he face next? I think, and I don't know the ins and outs of the UFC contracts, other than I only know what I hear and read online, but it sounds like they're looking for exclusivity in signing up athletes. And I think if they go about that, it's really going to limit the talent pool that they can attract. So quite a few of those under 145ers that I mentioned as potential opponents for Mikey, how many will sign up knowing that they might have restrictions on other events that they could take part in? I don't think grappling's yet big enough for exclusivity and contracts to really work. It works in other endeavors that TKO, the umbrella organization of the UFC, is involved in. So UFC, MMA, exclusive contracts can work there. Pro wrestling with WWE, exclusive contracts can work there. I don't know if jiu-jitsu is in a place, and specifically no-gi jiu-jitsu, where you're further limiting the talent pool, where they'll really work. But let's see what happens with the contract situation going forward. So who else would you like to see in that welterweight division? Quick shout out to the lightweights. Carlos Enrique won against Danilo Morera. I thought Carlos would win. Kind of went this way that I thought. Not just the way I thought. I'm not trying to big myself up, but like the way other people had talked about it. So it was that Carlos probably had too much, not just power, but like I could see him wearing down Danilo. Danilo's got a really, really good guard, but from what I'd seen from Carlos on the Road to the Title show, he's able to wear opponents down, and that's what he ultimately did. Who does he face next? Well, Keith Krikorian, who was #1 seed on Road to the Title, but lost in the first round to Isaac Doderline. Isaac's out with injury. He had an arm dislocation in the match against Carlos. So in the future, he could possibly be a contender for a rematch if you build him up, because his pedigree in grappling is really, really good. But Keith was the #1 seed going into it. Had that disappointing loss to Isaac. Had a sort of rehab win on the undercard here. I think with Keith, one thing I noticed is like he said after the match, there was a really good promo after the match. So he's a good character that I'd like to see the UFC push more. But Keith said after, he's a slow starter, particularly like in the round format. But I think one thing with Keith's slow start is it gives him the chance to be involved with some exchanges and then kind of figure out how the other person plays, and then ultimately like Keith gets into his stride, and then he's really, really good at getting on the back from exchanges. So Keith against Carlos, I think would be a good match. It would make sense, possibly for the lightweight title. And then you can let me know who else you think should be in the mix. Josh Cisneros as well. He had unfortunate failure in his weight cut to make the weight for the competition, so we didn't see anything of him. But hopefully the UFC can maybe give him a match, get him a win, and build him up for a title shot as well. So coming out of the event, I've had a couple of conversations with some guys who follow grappling online, and there's some ideas as to like what UFC could do to improve the event. And one thing I think this is something they should do, and it's not to be sniffed at, is it was cool to see the walkouts. You know, shout out to Andrew Tackett coming out to Song 2 by Blur. I think that's something they could really, really use, could add a bit more to, and gives a big match feel, and it's something they can do better than the other promotions in grappling. Walkouts are a big part of MMA, but something in the UK, darts, which sells out arenas with thousands of spectators, has millions of people watching the World Championships on Sky Sports. The walkouts are a huge part of the event. People love going, love singing along to the tunes. So if you get these guys with signature songs, and you get the fans involved in the walkouts and the pageantry, etc., which is something that UFC should be good at. They can take plenty of ideas from their partners, WWE. I think that's something they can do. So it was a good looking show. So I think they do that really well. I think the walkout's really good. Had some comments on the commentary. Tend to agree. I think the commentators have tried to do a good job speaking to any fans who are watching who are not huge grappling fans. But I think they have to realize that most people watching are going to be big grappling fans. So I know, like, you try to find that balance between like being able to converse with a new audience, but you don't want to dumb it down too much. And also, like, I'm speaking here, and I've probably had moments where I've struggled to find the right words, but when you're commentating and you're struggling to describe what a frame is in jiu-jitsu, I think that's not the best situation when most of your fans watching are going to be big jiu-jitsu heads. So yeah, maybe the commentary could be upped a little bit. I think it was Michael Kesa and Dean Thomas on. Maybe like switch one of them out, have one of them on, sure, but like maybe get someone on who can provide like a bit more jiu-jitsu analysis and is a little bit better with the terminology. But like on the whole, I think it was like a pretty good presentation. I just think they could maybe up the pageantry a little bit, because I think that's something that they can do that can sort of set themselves apart. So what else did you like or dislike about the UFC BJJ 1 show? They've announced 3 more events going forward, so this year we're going to see plenty of UFC BJJ. Let's see how the promotion evolves. That was just the first show. I think it was a good effort. We've got 3 new champions. Who should they face next? And what should UFC BJJ do to improve their product? Let me know in the comments, and we'll be back soon with more Jiu Jitsu and Oracle analysis of the elite grappling scene.